any violence by a large population is not because this people is more violent than any other. It's an alarm, it's a sign, it's a signal that something is wrong in the treatment of this population.
A petty dispatcher was seen in Jerusalem as Jewish and Arab arms clashed in the center of the city. It remains to be seen whether a threatened full-scale war will materialize.
جنود يعتلون المنازل والقناصر يتورعون عن إطلاق النار على كل شيء يمر أمامهم بمن فيه من صحفيين.
As a journalist, the more you look into the issue of Israel and Palestine, the more you sense that something is not quite right. The images and the narration are out of sync, a little like a foreign film that has been awkwardly dubbed.
بيوت مهدمة وطرق مدمرة وسيارة لم يعد يظهر منها إلا هياكلها أما طعام ودواء موجوده نادرا.
As you look into it for yourself, you begin to suspect that there is something extremely odd going on. The more you look into it, the more you begin to feel it is not just odd, it is deeply disturbing. Our media portray Middle East violence as though it's an inherent the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an ancient problem with little hope of solution.
دمار يخلفه الجيش الإسرائيلي في كل شبر من الضفة الغربية. مدينة السلام المحاصرة لا زالت ترفع غصن الزيتون. كنيسة المهد تقصف الآليات العسكرية. 200 مواطن محاصرون داخل الكنيسة دون طعام أو دواء.
These misperceptions come from the fact that we're only hearing a fraction of the story. You are about to witness images and testimony largely hidden from mainstream America.
This place draws many people, whether Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. This is a holy place to significant numbers of us in the world. We all have an interest in sort of seeing what is this land and what's the situation here. And once you come, if you open your eyes at all, you can't miss the problems and the patterns that are here.
I think it's hard to understand what occupation is. I think it's a foreign concept for many Americans. What it's like to live under military occupation.
The definition of an occupation is when a foreign army occupies your land physically and controls your life.
In addition, Palestinians under occupation, and this is why there's so much struggle against the occupation, they're not citizens of rights. They don't have civil rights. They're under a military rule.
This is a particular kind of occupation that's both military and settler occupation.
Settlements are areas of Palestinian land which are selected, and whatever is there, whether it's roads or whether it's villages or homes, they're bulldozed, and then a new town is built on the hilltop.
One very good friend is Rodina Jabber. She and her husband Atta have land in a rural valley near here called the Ba, and it's pretty clear these settlements want this land. Some of the best agricultural land around here. So that valley has had repeated home demolitions. The Rodina herself has lived through 2 home demolitions. They're living now in their third house.
اجت الجرافه طبعا مع الجيش اللي هجم علي على الخيمه انا انتخبت تهدوا نتقاتل انا وياهم انا صار يضربوني في راسي وكان لي بكلي وشعر مسكين شعر ونبش لما حطوا حكيت الجرافه على البيت هيك تذكرت اني نايم بالبيت هجمت على البيت تبدا اطوله احمل انا على البيت والجيش بيسحب في ظهري من ورا وفي ظهري وشباب في اجري وراس مسك شعري من الوكله وخلع شعري دفعته على الارض وواحد هيك مدين فيهم انا دبيت الجلد ودخل على الوجه في هيك
Rodina and her children were once again homeless and had to endure living in a tent for many months. Her husband Atta was even imprisoned for protesting the destruction of their home.
حاطه هيك تشرب في حالها ما شو بتساوي شو ما شو هذا قال خلص يعني احنا بدنا نضل قاعدين في الشمس بدناش نعيش بدنا نموت حالنا فكيتها يعني ساعتها كان الوضع سيء وشكل يعني تصور ليش امي عجبني اولادها بيحروا قدامي يعني حالتهم النفسيه لا تحت الصفر في الليل حتى الليل والله ما بنناموا بالليل طول الليل والله ما بنناموا ياما شوفي مين ياما شوفي الجيش قبل 3 ايام اجانا الجيش هذا تصوت من شقه وهذا يسرق من شقه وهذا حيلته والجيش بيقول هاتي هويتك هاتي الهويه
Here you have Palestinians that have no input whatsoever in the policies that are made. They're not in the city council. They're not in any of the decision-making bodies in the West Bank or Gaza. They're certainly not in the government. The policies are made in order to ensure Israeli control. So the law is designed in a way, in a very cynical way, to prevent Palestinians from building and keep them confined in little islands, so that most of the land of the occupied territories is free for Israeli settlement.
These are armed settlements, about 190 of them, spread all over the West Bank.
Settlements are strategically built colonies of Israel that are connected by a network of roads which separate each Palestinian community from the next and confine their ability to expand. They are often constructed around the best farmland and water resources.
They're surrounded by barbed wire. They are armed inside. Settler residents are required to be armed by the Israeli military. And they are defended from the outside by the Israeli military itself.
The purpose of these settlements today, number one, is to continue the Israeli control and domination of the occupied territories.
The bottom line in all of this is to make Palestinians leave the country. It's a very hard term, I know, but in a sense it's a kind of ethnic cleansing.
The Israeli government and the Israeli army is not dealing with people as equal. I mean, I think that that's the main problem, that Palestinians are not considered, are not perceived as equals to Israelis.
There is no specific discrimination against Palestinian Christians as opposed to Palestinian Muslims. It's a shared suffering.
Christians see them very much, themselves very much a part of the Palestinian national movement. They identify with the Palestinian people as being their people.
Palestinian Christians have difficulty getting to churches on Sunday morning if they want to come to Jerusalem because they don't have that permission or that legal right, according to the Israeli government, to come to Jerusalem for worship.
This, I picked up a poem of a wonderful Christian family in Beit Jala. And this is the kind of armor-piercing weaponry that's being used against civilians.
It's not easy to tell everything, you know. It's easy to say some words, but you can't tell how they feel. As everybody, I want my children to be happy, to live the right life as children. We just think about one thing. Where can I put my children where they are sitting? They don't want to go to school because they are scared to come back and there is no house. They doesn't want to go home without me and their father because they think that they will lose us. What about these children? Why they are going to the States? They don't think, let's go to swim. Because I'm sure they have no right to swim now. Why? Because we are Palestinian. Thanks God. I don't imagine that there is a woman in all of the world can send her child or her man just go to die. They think they are working all of this life to give them something and to let them die in a minute. Can you?
suffering the persecution of Christians, they've been robbed of their heritage. They've been robbed of their ancestral lands. They've been robbed of their culture.
Some of the first converts to the teachings of Jesus were Palestinians. So that's how long Christians have been in that land. Their quarter, the Christian quarter, has been really, really decimated and taken over and sliced up.
That has really bled the Christian community to where they're less than 2% of the population now.
The presence of a Christian community within the whole land, can you imagine? Where Jesus first set foot will no longer be there.
I know both from the moral sense and from the practical sense that the only way to stop the violence is to treat the root cause from which the violence started.
The number one myth that Westerners have about this conflict is that Arabs and Jews have been fighting for thousands of years and are going to continue to fight.
This is really quite bizarre because all it takes is a little bit of reading of history to find out that this just isn't true. There is no congenital historical enmity between the Arabs and the Jews. The Jews flourished in the Arab world at a time when they were being persecuted throughout all of Europe.
At the end of the 19th century, because of anti-Semitism in Europe, European Jews began to try and figure out a solution to the Jewish problem. A very small minority adhered to Zionism, the idea that the only place in which they could be safe is within the Jewish state.
Zionist Jews actually had a design on the land of Palestine, the idea of creating a homeland for Jews in the land of Palestine. And this is really the beginning of the conflict.
The mainstream Israeli Jewish society believed, because that's the way they had been educated, that Palestine was empty, had been empty when the Jewish settlers came.
Who paid the price when they settled there? Is it really true that Israel was a land without a people for a people without a land?
Palestine was not empty. It was land populated by Arabs who had high level of culture, high level of education.
With farms and markets and towns and villages, and roads and commerce and lots of interaction with the rest of the world.
The population was overwhelmingly Arab.
Jewish immigration increased under British rule following World War I, when Britain implemented the Balfour Declaration, promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This measure conflicted with Britain's previous promise of self-rule for Arab inhabitants throughout the region.
Britain was basically extremely supportive of the Zionist movement. It helped to establish all of the structures of a state. At the same time, the Arabs of Palestine were denied the right of self-determination.
The Palestinians saw a European power decide the future of a non-European territory, in flat disregard of both their presence and wishes. In the 1920s, as land was being stripped away from local residents, the first clashes between Palestinians and Jews began, and would continue on for years to come. Until the early 1930s, the Jewish population of Palestine remained under 17%. Hitler's rise to power in Germany completely changed that. In just 5 years, 174,000 Jews flooded into Palestine, doubling their population. As the world attempted to make amends for the horrors of Nazi genocidal policies, efforts to make Palestine a Jewish homeland increased.
The Palestinians, they were not the Nazis. They were not responsible for the Holocaust. But they were the ones who paid the price.
In 1947, with the conflict spiraling out of control, Britain decided to turn the problem of Palestine over to the United Nations. The UN, under pressure, proposed to divide the land into two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state. Arabs were to be given 43% of the land, despite the fact that they made up more than two-thirds of the population and owned over 92% of the land. Jews were to be given 56%, although they comprised only one-third of the population and owned less than 8% of the total area.
Nevertheless, they were given not only most of the land, they were given the most fertile land.
Zionist leaders took advantage of their superior military preparation and immediately began occupying major Arab cities in Palestine.
I was among the people that conquered Arab. When we were walking around, we entered the flat. There was a pair of shoes. A small child, maybe 2 years old. He didn't have time to put on the shoes, so they left the shoes and they ran away. They left everything.
We found out there was a systematic expulsion of Palestinians, and it was, as I said, it was an ethnic cleansing operation taking place.
The most infamous campaign was the massacre at the village of Deir Yassin, where over 100 men, women, and children were systematically murdered.
هذا البيت كانت شابين فيه أنا وأولادي يا موسى مكانيتنا لكم مسافر كان نتونس بعض فيه هذا البيت أجو قال من المكان فأي مش خبرتنا فينا بلا وزي صوتنا بيت الصواب مسافر أولادي وكان بعد ما راحت المراكز الحياة كتكسر وطلعونا ديما كنت أخذ الصدمة في على وجهها اللي كنت له المواد 250 ليرة من عندي وكنت يا خواجة شغل لها بدها صدق لسه انت كويس وقت المصاري بارس اخوتي الحن وش يا اخوتي الحن اجراك ايه سلام انا من هو حتى في السير يكون اصلا مسجد حتى كم سنه على السير
The ruthlessness of the attack on Deir Yassin drove fear and panic into the Palestinian population and led to the flight of unarmed civilians from their homes all over the country.
As a result, maybe 300 or so thousand Palestinians had already been expelled before the first Arab soldier entered Palestine.
Some of the neighboring Arab armies finally intervened after May 15, 1948, when Israel officially announced its statehood.
Although there was a lot of war rhetoric on the Arab side, very few Arab soldiers were sent into the battlefield. And actually, for most part of the war, there was superiority on the side of the Israeli army.
The Israeli army cleansed much of the territory and took over a large part of the designated Palestinian state.
The new state of Israel encompassed 78% of the total land of Palestine. The West Bank came under Jordanian control and the Gaza Strip under Egyptian dominion. Although a truce was declared between Israel and the Arab states, true peace remained elusive, as over 700,000 Palestinian refugees languished in nearby camps, often in sight of homes to which they still held deeds and a deep desire to return.
Most of the deserted either turned into settlements or into fertile land.
Of the 500 Palestinian villages in what became Israel in 1948, 400 were destroyed.
These efforts to destroy the possibility of their returning home were countered by the United Nations, which continues to affirm their human right enshrined in international law and morality to return.
A Palestinian who had lost her land or lost his land as a result of the creation of Israel in 1948 cannot come back even for a visit. I can go back to Israel as if I were returning and claim immediate citizenship, having no historic tie, speaking no Hebrew, knowing no one in the country, having no family who ever was there. All that one needs is being Jewish, a religious group like any other.
No problem till the Zionist movement starts. My grandmother tell me before the Zionist movement starts, they babysitting each other kids. They often watch each other like brothers, like brothers. The idea of Zionism to take away the land from starting the whole fight. Not Arabs the problem, not Jews the problem, not Judaism, not Islam, only Zionism.
The events of 1948 were a defining moment for the Middle East, and from that point onward created instability throughout the region. Violent tensions continued and led to another war in 1967. In that war, Israel occupied the remainder of historic Palestine, what is known today as the West Bank and Gaza.
Another myth was that Israel was about to be pushed into the sea, but I was working in the State Department at that time. There was no question of Israel being pushed into the sea. The question was just the rapidity and the totalness of the Israeli victory, and the victory was crushing.
During the 1967 war, Israel displaced more than 400,000 Palestinians, half of whom were 1948 refugees, displaced for a second time in less than 2 decades. It became clear that the world was not going to address their plight. Palestinians in Israel lived as third-class citizens of a state whose core identity excluded them, while those in the newly occupied territories and abroad continued as dispossessed refugees. The United Nations passed resolution after resolution affirming their rights. Leaders of surrounding Arab nations verbally championed their cause, but failed to take action. Finally, Palestinians took matters into their own hands. There was a mass uprising, in Arabic an intifada, shaking off, as people throughout the West Bank and Gaza Strip rebelled. The Israeli government adopted a strategy, in the words of Defense Minister Itzhak Rabin, of might, power, and beatings, which became known as the break the bone strategy. Thousands of Palestinians were rounded up and imprisoned. Since 1967, over 400,000. Many were held without any charges whatsoever, under harsh conditions where physical abuse and torture were rampant.
Today, we bear witness to an extraordinary act
in one of history's defining dramas.
The Oslo process begins officially with the handshake on the White House lawn.
The main misconception is that the years of Oslo were years of peace.
And in that period, when there was supposed to be a peace process underway, in fact, the daily lives of Palestinians throughout the occupied territories got worse and worse and worse.
The reality, I saw it with my own eyes, that it was a new form of Israeli domination over Palestinians.
Economic and social rights, which are rights to health, education, work, etc. These areas are the areas that declined the worst for the majority of Palestinians, almost all Palestinians.
All the economic indicators turned for worse under Oslo during this peace process.
Moreover, Israeli settlements have continued to expand throughout that period.
At the same time that Israeli control was expanding, the Palestinian Authority was given the trappings of power over the shrinking and non-contiguous Palestinian land, being held out as a future Palestinian state.
The challenges of governing for the Palestinian Authority are extraordinarily complex. This is an authority that has very little authority. It has virtually no power. Its power is derivative. It has the power that is given to it by Israel. And at any moment, any of those powers can be taken away.
It was very convenient to believe that there is no occupation, the occupation is over. How many aspects in your life somebody else determines for you? This is occupation. And Israel could determine in the last 10 years, could determine everything. But everybody heard Arafat saying 10 times, 100 times, that Ramallah is liberated, that Gaza is liberated. How can we liberate if there is an army around it? The Palestinian officials spoke very warmly about the situation, about the reality, and they were hiding the fact that for the great majority of the population, this year was a disaster.
Those abuses, those violations of the public trust have been happening regularly since the Oslo process began.
Palestinians who would protest against Oslo were labeled as terrorists. The authority would not allow it, the PA.
Instead of having a real national authority who has a corrupt institution, whose main task as far as Israel is concerned was to police the Palestinians and prevent them from resisting the continuing occupation.
It has wasted a lot of money. The international community has given it. One sees the villas of the leading Palestinian officials and the poverty with which the Palestinian masses are living in.
The performance of the PLO in running the Palestinian Authority and its failures in negotiating with Israel have very much diminished support for PLO leadership.
While Americans were being told by the media that a peace process was moving forward, Israel continued its policy of home demolition. Since 1967, about 12,000 Palestinian homes have been demolished. More than 700 of those homes were demolished during the Oslo peace process.
What you've got to have, and I think it's a fair demand on the part of Palestinians, that during the process of negotiation, you're not turning over more and more territory to Israeli settlers and changing the character of the land that you're supposed to be negotiating about.
The notion that this is going to be a negotiable question does not ring true to any Palestinian who lives up against one of these settlements, which are continually expanding. And what does it mean to expand? It means you steal more land.
Abdul Jawad is a Palestinian farmer whose family has lived there and tended the land for centuries. The Israeli authorities have confiscated countless acres of their farmland.
شوف الصدر اللي كان موجود هون يعني كيف واحد بقعد بجنة أنا مسوي جنة هو شوف بدال الجنة شو سووا معاي شوف هذا إذا بتتفرج شو هذا اللي سووه
شوف الأشجار يطلعون من تحت الحجار شايف كيف يطلع الأشجار من تحت الحجار مش حرام هذا يبقى بدل ما يقعد بني آدم اللي بيقول الله مش حرام هذا يقعد بدله حاجة زي هذه هذه معيشتنا لا إن لا بر ولا بحر ولا جو هذه المعيشة تاعتنا وبنستنى لطف الله شو نعمل؟
These settlers live and prosper at the expense of the Palestinians and the Palestinians' well-being, present well-being, and future well-being.
And they don't see this horrible, disproportionate allocation of resources where Jewish settlers get water and electricity and gas, garbage pickup, all kinds of things that their Palestinian neighbors don't get because of the military occupation.
هذيك المنطقة منطقة بين العين ممنوعة التجارية هذول دور شوف يعني في واحد شوف يعني واحد محوس في قلب دور من العرب ولا واحد محوس من العرب موجود هناك هذه السيارة يعني لو ما إسرائيلية بعرفهاش.
They lost the middle of the valley for a bypass road, which is now an Israeli-only bypass road. They can't drive on it to go to their home.
The thing is extremely ugly to watch. I mean, this is just day-to-day life, not about fighting here. I mean, walk through Hebron, it's an Arab city, or a dozen Arab, a couple hundred Jews. Settlers walking around with rifles, you know, looking as if they own the place.
Settlers can go in a Palestinian village and burn the field there, destroy the house, even shoot Palestinians.
Several of the women have been beaten by settlers on different occasions. In each of those cases, we were just being a non-violent presence on the street, observing when settlers were acting out. And they just attacked different ones of us.
The Israeli government is not doing anything to try and stop the settlers from violating Palestinian rights. From all cases that settlers actually killed Palestinians, very few were accused of murder, but then the president came and gave amnesty or shortened the punishment that they received from the court. In some cases, they cooperate with them, they guard them. Like one case, the settlers went and took a house, Palestinian house, and just said, well, now it's ours. So the border police stood down there to protect them because the Palestinians were angry. So the border police stood there and protected the settlers. Instead of course, arresting them, saying it's illegal.
The bottom line is to make things so difficult for the Palestinians that anybody that wants a future for their children, anybody that wants to get ahead in life, anybody that wants a normal life will leave.
يعني أنا اللي عنده جنة زي هذه ويعني بده يرحل وبده يروح ويرحل ويدشرها وين بدنا نروح إحنا وندشر أرضنا اللي زي هذه.
The Jabir family continues to live under constant harassment. Most recently, Abdul Jawad broke his leg while trying to protect his grandchildren from settler attacks.
Many of us feel hostage, that we're held hostage to the settlers. I think the vast majority of Israelis don't care about the occupied territories. We're held hostage to the settlers that have enough political power within the Israeli political system that they can frustrate any attempt to get them out, and as long as they're there, the Palestinians can't possibly make peace.
There are two kinds of settlers, basically. There are the ideological settlers who feel that these territories have been promised to the Jewish people by God, and they feel that every place which is mentioned in the Bible, they have not only the but a sacred duty to come and to build their modern Jewish settlement, and if Palestinians who live in that spot have other ideas, then they have the right to break their resistance by force or to call in the army. And other kind, which are the more majority of the settlers, are in fact ordinary Israelis who came there because the government was offering them very cheap housing. When you go to live there, then most of the money you get is a government loan, and if you stay there for 10 years, you don't have to pay back the loan.
Well, I think the unpleasant and unavoidable comparison is with South Africa during the apartheid period. And I must say that, having visited South Africa, that they were much better off than Palestinians living in the refugee camps.
We were to take because it was impossible to sit still while the obscenity of the apartheid system was being imposed on our people.
The United States are seeing quite correctly it's been the sole supporter of Israel, and that Israel will not be able to do what it is doing without American green light.
The U.S.-Israeli relationship is really unique on Capitol Hill. In my 22 years that I served there, there was never a moment when there was really a debate about U.S. policy in the Middle East. It was always what does Israel want, and almost always Congress gave them exactly what they wanted without any debate, without any amendments being considered. This type of policy exists as a result of a number of factors. First of all, there is the lobby, the U.S. lobby for Israel, AIPAC, American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. It has a multi-million-dollar budget. It has a highly professional group of people working on Capitol Hill. They know the legislative process, they know the personalities, and therefore it advances what's best for the state of Israel.
Congress seems to think that if you oppose what Israel wants, you'll be defeated in the next election.
Another factor is the fundamentalist Christian community. Fundamentalists are often represented by the televangelists that are on TV. They believe that as long as Israel is a part of God's plan, they believe that the day will come when a battle will occur in the plain of Armageddon. In the Middle East. There will be the forces of truth and righteousness on one side, the forces of evil on the other side. And in that struggle, the Christian forces, led by the second coming of Jesus Christ, will prevail. All of the Jews will be either destroyed or converted instantly to Christianity. It may sound to the viewer as a very far-out notion, believe me, it is widely held and supported by millions of Americans whose doctrines really, in the ultimate, are hostile to the survival of Jews, but nevertheless, the supporters of Israel see this vast body of American people as being a great asset at this time. So they embrace them.
And Mr. Robertson, who said, I have a vision from God that we have to support Israel. And no matter what happens and what they do, this is the will of God because they're God's chosen people. A couple of weeks later, he added, and that's when this ministry started really being blessed. We made that commitment to Israel, not the commitment to God or Jesus Christ's teachings, but to Israel.
And we have come from all the nations of the earth to say to the people of Israel, we are your friends, we are with you, and we believe that you are called by God to possess this land.
I, as a Christian and a Christian pastor, object not in my name and not in the name of over 115 or 120 million Christians do you dare say that we support injustice and deceit. We do not.
The citizenry of this democratic society is systematically deprived of access to the real facts.
The American media play a major role in continuing U.S. support for Israel through leaving up vast swaths of information. It is the classic case of lying through omission. Major statements by American diplomats, senators, military leaders are going unreported. Sentences are being removed from news stories. Information is being manipulated.
Those are the three factors that work together on Capitol Hill and lead to such total bias, such total absence of free speech, of open debate, that is, I think, very destructive to our institutions and to our best interests in world affairs.
So Israel, for example, does not abide at all by international law. The entire occupation is illegal. It's a violation, in particular, of the Fourth Geneva Convention. By the rules of the Fourth Geneva Convention, you're not allowed to build settlements, you're not allowed to build roads, you're not allowed to expropriate land, you're not allowed to deport people, you're not allowed to restrict their freedom of movement, you're not allowed to harm the economy, you're not allowed to make them unemployed and impoverished.
But everything that Israel does in the occupied territories, U.S. taxpayers are paying for. The U.S. gives the financing, it gives the military support.
Israel receives as much foreign economic assistance as all the countries combined in the world.
In March 2003, the U.S. government approved $10 billion in aid for Israel. At the same time, it withheld a $3.5 billion grant to upgrade the training of first responders, those who would be first to respond to a terrorist attack. Spent domestically, that $10 billion could buy health care coverage for over 4 million children without proper coverage, or pay for 1.5 million American children to attend Head Start child development programs to prepare them for school, or simply help the costs of one of the worst fiscal crises in half a century.
One of the reasons that the American commitment to Israel is so strong, that it's not only reflecting the impact of well-organized pro-Israeli lobbies, but it also represents the views of the Pentagon that sees Israel now as an indispensable strategic ally in the effort to control and exert influence throughout the region.
The main concern for the United States, like the world, is the oil-producing regions. And in order to control that, you need a way of doing it.
Desperate for a peace that would finally end occupation, Palestinians again came to the negotiating table in 2000.
People think, look, Israel was very forthcoming. It offered 95% of the West Bank, of the occupied territories to the Palestinians, and they rejected it in violence. The assumption of that 95% argument is that getting 95% of the land gives you 95% sovereign, a sovereign country. But I think it's very useful to think in terms of a prison. If you look at a blueprint of a prison, it looks like the prisoners own the place. And the prisoners have 95% of the area. They've got the living areas, they have the exercise yard, they have the cafeteria, they've got the work areas. All the prison authorities have is 5%, is the control.
The average Palestinian didn't think they were throwing anything away because there was nothing to throw away. They tuned out what Barak and Arafat were talking about. Because on the ground, there were ongoing land expropriations, tree uprootings, road building, unfair water allocation, leaving many Palestinian families in the summer involved with 2 hours of running water a week. The next door is a settlement with a swimming pool and green lawns. So what do you expect people to think?
And it was that pressure, that sense of being squeezed, that finally exploded in September of 2000 in what became the Second Intifada.
The Second Intifada is essentially a mobilization of resistance against this structure of occupation and oppression. Israel, from the very beginning of these demonstrations, had indeed relied on excessive force. They had used live ammunition against unarmed demonstrators, had inflicted several deaths and hundreds of casualties in the opening days of the Intifada.
Sometimes the Israelis are speaking about rubber bullets they used. By the way, it's not rubber, it's steel-coated rubber. This bullet, it killed many of the kids who are demonstrating. While they're throwing stones. As this case, I'll show you what happened. He is a 14 years old from Canyon. I'll shoot with a one like this, enter here, and he died.
A lot of the deaths have been children, and we do have some documentary evidence that security forces are firing on crowds of children.
the soldiers weren't at risk. They're heavily armored, they have all this high-powered weaponry. No child with a stone is going to be a risk to them.
Most of the Palestinian abuses involve shooting at settlements, ambushes on settler cars, and obviously the suicide bombings inside Israel.
There are some risks to Israeli life. Many Israelis have been killed.
When there was horrible suicide bombing at the pizza place in Jerusalem, I went to visit the kids who survived that blast in the hospital. It was horrible. It was horrible to see what happened to these children.
You see the blood, you see the agony of the family. This is what the world sees. But one cannot take it out of the general context. The context is of an Israeli occupation which seems not to be so brutal, but it's very brutal. It really makes people's lives unbearable.
Use of suicide bombers is an act of desperation. It's the weapons of the weak.
Israel doesn't do it never, because it has the airplanes and helicopters. Why should they send anybody to make suicide?
I think we have to change our conception of what Israel is. It presents itself as this little country surrounded by a sea of hostile Arabs, and we just want peace and they're violent. Israel is the fifth largest nuclear power in the world. It's got between 200 and 300 nuclear warheads. So the reality is that Israel is a regional superpower.
For the first time, the resistance to that occupation had, to a very small extent, an armed component. There was nothing close to equal force.
At every stage, they had used grossly excessive force against a completely defenseless civilian population.
The victims have been overwhelmingly Palestinian civilians, overwhelmingly, not armed groups or armed individuals.
Has established all of these checkpoints within the West Bank, which require Palestinians to wait hours and hours to go very short distances.
Just the freedom of movement, and it's something the Palestinians are denied on a daily basis. The access to Jerusalem, the access to health care, the access to hospitals, clinics, and schools.
We're talking about 3 million people who's had their freedom of movement totally stopped. It's a violation of international law. The right to freedom of movement is the fundamental right of the Declaration of Human Rights. What you have is young Israeli conscripts who look bored. These guys are sitting out there and they're watching thousands of Palestinians go by. They have carte blanche, pull anyone over and harass them for whatever reason. You can detain them for hours. It's a dangerous situation.
The main population that are being affected by Israeli policies is the civilian population. Those population who is not being involved in any attacks against Israelis, civilians or their family.
During the time of closure, unfortunately, there have been lots of bombings, lots of attacks. The closure is not meant to deter suicide bombers. It's meant to punish and put pressure on 3 million civilians.
People do not earn anymore because the majority of Palestinians used to work in Israel, and the majority of the Palestinian economy was based on the income of people who were working inside Israel. Now they can go to Israel, so tens of thousands of families just lose the source of income that they had. The education system is also affected by that. Students cannot go to the university.
14 times. The longest closure was during the first Intifada. For 5 years, we could not set foot on campus. During this period, we organized what the Israeli army called cells of illegal education. We were teaching in apartments, in rented flats, in churches, in mosques, in gardens, in cars, and we kept our infrastructure. Even this attempt to minimize the damage and to keep the university going, they attempted to crush it.
I went to college in the States and I found it very different. The biggest worry about in the States if I'm going to pass in class or I hope I have a lot of friends. Over here it's totally different. You have to worry, oh my God, will I be able to get to school? Is there going to be a checkpoint? Is there going to be a demonstration? Am I going to get shot at? Is there going to be tear gas? So it's completely different.
Here it's just you don't know if you're going to live or you're going to die, you know? So you're going to school as if you're going to fight a war. You don't find a tank in the middle of the road when you're going to college.
Just the other day, there were 2 tanks in an army jeep, and they're standing there checking your passport and your student visa and all this stuff. It's just we want to get to school, we want an education. We're humans and we have a right to education.
In places like the United States, people cannot understand what's going on because simply the experience is beyond their frame of reference.
I can't study at night because my bedroom light is going to be open and across the street from there. They shot at me. I was reading my biology book. I was studying for my midterm, and my mom was like, "No, get out of the room because they started shooting." I was like, "No, Mom, I don't need anything in class. Let me study." So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden you hear something on my bedroom window. I'm just like, okay, maybe we should go downstairs. I couldn't study for my test. It's like I tell my American friends, do you understand what I'm going through?
The amazing thing is not that you have cases of suicidal students. The amazing thing is the bulk of them, they try to carry on in the middle of this mess as if life is normal, as if they want to celebrate their graduation and they want to build their life and they want to carry on. That's the other part of the coin. The root problem here is occupation. Everything else emanates from there.
The most severe problem is people who need medical care.
We've documented numerous cases where people have died. In fact, I believe that one of the last cases we documented was a woman who was in labor, who was not allowed to go to the hospital, and she and the baby both died.
If people like that, if people who are really sick and really need to go to hospitals cannot do that, well, I think you can imagine what happened to regular people that just want to go to work, just want to go to do some shopping, or even just visit friends.
It's like living in prison, a gigantic prison.
Haaretz, the intellectual newspaper in Israel, ran a whole 4-page magazine article on the refugee issue that had a picture of Tel Aviv University now and what was there before Tel Aviv University. A Palestinian village. And those refugees are in Gaza.
I think that Gaza is a main problem. There are lots of violations that you will see in the West Bank, you will see in Gaza. We find it hard to monitor the human rights situation in Gaza because the Israeli army do not let us in.
Palestinians in Gaza had been under Israeli military control for over 38 years, where 1.3 million Palestinians were crowded together to make room for 8,000 Israeli settlers. In August of 2005, Israel dismantled its settlements and military posts inside Gaza and relocated its settlers. The media, along with Israeli politicians, portrayed this as an unprecedented sacrifice. In reality, it was simply a matter of Israel finally complying with international law. Although Israel's presence inside Gaza is no longer visible, Israel will still retain ultimate control over Gaza's borders, coastal waters, and airspace, creating a virtual prison.
Refugee camps, even if there was no conflict with Israel, are just humanly horrible. They're so overcrowded. You have 14 to 25 people living in a space. There's no place